Today we're going to look at 5.3, Nationalism, Revolution, and Reform. We're going to pay very close attention today to the actual revolution and reform pieces of this. Nationalism has already been discussed at some extent, and we'll tie a little bit back into it. But today we're really going to deal with the rebellions and the reforms that lead to Roman numeral 3, increasing discontent with imperial rule, propelling reformist and revolutionary movements. So one of the ways in which we have to look at this is that during this time period, different subjects throughout the world are challenging the centralized imperial government model. We've seen the Enlightenment now doing this in certain areas, and now we have to add some other examples to this discussion. Two of those examples are rebellions that are a little bit lesser known, but are still impactful based on who they're impacting, and in this case, it's the gunpowder empires. More specifically, the Mughals and the Ottomans. You have first the Marathas Rebellion, which is against the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. He has been very persecutory towards Hindus, and so that is not a very good thing that's going to be happening, since that majority population of Hindus is going to be very annoyed very quickly. So this rebellion carried out by Hindus is going to be ignored, which allows it to grow and get more and more feverish. And actually, one of his own sons, Aurangzeb's sons, joins this rebellion. It's a 27-year affair and cost Aurangzeb many millions of dollars to put down and make stabilized. Eventually, when the final leader within that rebellion dies without an heir, there you have a situation happening where Aurangzeb has been dead. He also does not have an heir. The rebellion kind of doesn't restart, and the Mughal Empire kind of just fades into the oblivion and is replaced by other colonial type of acquisitional powers, which we will talk about in a few slides. And then your Wahhabi Rebellion, you have that one. That's a fundamentalist rebellion. This is a group of people in Islam who do not like the Ottoman Sultan, and they don't believe that he should be considered the religious leader for Islam, which was in place for quite some time, since the Ottoman Empire was controlling all of the Islamic world major points. Eventually, this rebellion leads to trade being impacted because the rebels are attacking caravans in the trade routes, and Mecca and Medina, some of the holiest cities within this Islamic center, are taken over as well and controlled. The Ottomans in charge send soldiers, obviously, to put down this rebellion. One of the most famous ones is Muhammad Ali, and he'll be very important for Egypt to come down the road, but he goes into Egypt to help put down the rebellion, and along the way he does recapture the holy cities, and the leader of the rebellion is captured and sent to Istanbul for execution. Muhammad Ali, I'm speaking of, will use his foothold in this territory and the success that he has had to garner more and more support, eventually becoming an integral force here in opposition towards the Ottoman state, and we'll talk about him more specifically here in a few slides. Or one slide. His goal, when he starts becoming more and more popular, is to kind of set up a European-style state within the borders of the Ottoman territory. He wants this to become a full independent nation, and he tries to, assert its independence by making sure that Egypt can prosper financially. And one of the ways he does that is by trying to secure different revenue streams. He will start a long history of nationalization by the government. In this case, he nationalizes all the land, and the government will eventually take over all land and production, therefore, on that land. This is a special annexation of property done by taxation, really. He raises taxes, and the farmers that are on the territory who have owned that land for quite some time cannot pay these really intentionally high taxes, so they go broke and they go into debt. And rather than put them out of debt or whatever, Muhammad Ali just says, okay, we'll call the debt even by confiscating the property, the land, and that's what he does. So besides agriculture and taxation needing to be looked at, Muhammad Ali is also trying to build up the industry, because he needs both in order to make this work. So his main motivation is to build more military complexes for what he hopes to build as an independent country. Tanks, machine guns, etc., are muskets, are intended to be built at some point during this buildup of the industrial complex, which will lead to other industrial complexes, mainly the textile industry. Some of the best cotton in the world was being grown in the Egyptian region. He wants to stimulate production of that cotton and turn it into textiles, which had been largely a European-dominated affair. And although that does not prove to be successful, he does supply thousands and tens of thousands of Egyptians with jobs, and the leaders of his new fledgling systems and new growing systems will become the foundation of your professional bureaucratic system in Egypt. He will call for the massive education of these new leaders in order to be more competitive versus their European counterparts. He also returns a lot of the labor here to corvée labor with conscription, so that's also something that we saw a couple time periods ago, and he, as an example, is bringing that back. So make sure you know about that kind of change over time / maybe possibly continuity. He is widely considered to be the father of modern Egypt. We call him that even though they are not independent when he passes away. He does lay the majority of the foundation, so a lot of historians call him the father of modern Egypt. And then we have, stemming off of 5.3 Roman numeral 3, you've got a discussion of the spread of Enlightenment ideas, once again causing discontent and leading to these movements. D looks at the increasing questions about political authority and growing nationalism, and all of that contributing to anti-colonial movements. And you've got many examples for this one as well. Two of the main ones are the Sepoy Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion. The Sepoy Rebellion in India, of course, is started as a mutiny. Sepoys were the names of the local Indian soldiers that were given very little power and authority by the overhead leaders from economically based companies like, for example, the Dutch East India Company. And so this army that was founded by certain groups here eventually will have a mutiny, and that'll kind of de-evolve into a full-scale rebellion by most of the civilian classes. There's a lot of causes for the initial rebellion. Two of the main ones were that the army was being built upon certain ethnic caste groupings, and then in order to grow the army quickly, the East India Company sought different caste groups to fill in and make that army bigger, and of course that led to social, cultural conflicts within the army itself. And as one group loses power and the other group gains power, the group that loses power but still has lots of numbers is going to be obviously quite upset. The other main reason was that the actual British use of tallow when they're doing ammunition, and that tallow was like a grease, and that grease supposedly was made with the fat of beef. And so obviously that's being a sacred animal to Hindus. That's going to be a big no-no, and that's one of the reasons why they're going to eventually rebel. This is sometimes known as the India's first war for independence, and although they don't gain independence, they won't gain that until after World War II is over. They do have the recourse and the punishment, I should say, of Britain tightening its grip and exacting reparations on some of the locals to pay for the time and material and the manpower that went into putting down this rebellion. And of course, the Boxer Rebellion here, signified by this very famous political cartoon. You have a civil war, in essence. There's a peasant rebellion that has tried to get rid of all foreigners, because most of your peasant classes see the danger of economic interests and socio-cultural things going on within their country and their territory, so much so that we have eventually this kind of secret society that was given. Boxer, in essence, is the name that was given to some kind of clandestine Chinese secret society that kind of organized this rebellion, and it happened in the late 19th century due to a lot of different causes there. I wrote some of them for you. Economic impoverishment, unfortunate national calamity, unbridled foreign aggression, and therefore, once again, the Boxers and their supporters are starting to push into different regions and provinces in China. Eventually, the Europeans kind of gang up on China. 19,000 or so troops are assembled, and through fighting and through support and through economic blockading and all that kind of stuff, the Europeans have a resounding victory. There's 100,000 civilians, mostly Christian actually, that are reportedly killed in this conflict, and there are 3,000 to 5,000 Boxer troops that are put down. Once again, Europe makes sure that it gets full reparations for the losses that they incurred from this conflict. Another example that's on the smaller scale is the Mahdist Revolt. This is a colonial war happening in the 19th century in the Sudan. They had experienced lots of hardship from people like Muhammad Ali and the Ottomans, and the government can't really find enough support and funding to undertake the building of the Suez Canal. So Great Britain is going to step in and put themselves in charge of that, so to speak. One of the leaders here of this group, known as Muhammad Ahmad, he claims to be one of the redeemers of Islam, a Mahdi, and so he will actually organize people and troops to carry out a rebellion. After many, many years, the British finally pull the Egyptian government out of the Sudan, trying to avoid conflict, and this is only strengthened as far as their resolve when the Berlin Conference rolls around in 1885. Great Britain will re-extend control from the Sudan, with Egypt, and they will snuff out and kind of outlast the dying out members of this rebellion. 5.3 also mentions that there is a term known as millenarianism. This comes from the Latin term meaning containing 1,000. It is basically a religious thought, a religious, political, or social group of movements that leads to great change. And so when you start talking about religion influencing rebellion, a couple of examples that are definitely mentioned by the AP curriculum: the ghost dancing phenomenon in the American Native groups. You have the Koksa cattle killing movement that's happening in South Africa, and then you have the Taiping Rebellion that's happening in China. For the ghost dancing, you have this as a practice by which Native American populations, mainly in the Oklahoma and center of the country, get together. They form a circle and they start dancing and chanting to their deceased. And it's believed that the spirits of the dead will unite with the spirits of the living, and the dead would fight on the behalf of the living to scare the white colonists for one, to bring about peace and prosperity for another, and finally to bring unity through the dance to the region of Native American tribes. This is happening right around 1890s or so, give or take. There's a tie-in with this kind of pact being made during this dancing to kind of help ease the colonists out of their territory, very similarly to how we saw in our Haitian Revolution video. When the voodoo priests and stuff got together before the Haitian Revolution, they kind of sealed a covenant with blood, right? Remember that? When they're doing the voodoo practices and kind of agreeing to fight together. This ghost dancing is a way that the Native American tribes are doing the exact same thing of unity with one another. Several major battles are as a result of this kind of collection of different groups, like the Battle of Wounded Knee, which is important and kind of famous down the road here when you get to U.S. history, hopefully. Finally, that as of note, that dance, the ghost dancing, is still utilized by some Native American groups today as a cultural phenomenon. It does not successfully die out, even though the rebellion and the practices that it preached never really go or amount for too many long-term solutions. And then we have the Yoksa cattle killing movement. There is a 15-year-old priestess in South Africa who goes into the field with a friend and supposedly sees spirits and proclaims that she saw some of her ancestors in that field. And the ancestors told her, by her own account, that the people that she belongs to, the Xhosa, they're going to need to kill all the cattle and burn all of their crops, and that simultaneously would drive the British from their lands. If they don't do that, the cows, who for the most part were dying of a lung disease that was brought by British cattle intermixing with the native populations, it would actually kind of make them die out and become what she called living dead cows, or as I call, zombie cows. And so that's not good, obviously, for her people. After the killing of more than 400,000 head of cattle in 1857, that was a pretty big year, obviously, since the Sepoy Rebellion, she was arrested and sent to jail. The population of the Xhosa dwindled shortly thereafter from 105,000 to 27,000. Actually, if you think about it, the death and starvation that occurred is a direct causation from the killing of all the animals. There was a lot of widespread famine that happened because of that loss of 400,000 head of cattle and all the subsidiaries that come off of it. And then we have our Taiping Rebellion. Now, the Taiping had a program happening in China currently during the discussion period where they had a lot of distrust of the Manchus that were there previous. There was a lot of talk of abolition of private property and kind of a communal wealth for sharing. They had gotten rid of the practice of foot binding and instituted other things that were going to help make equality more equal, like public education and easier written language, which is kind of going to, once again, kind of bridge cultural groups there. They also wanted literacy for everyone, once again tying back to education, and there was designed to be equality between men and women, and even some went as far as to preach the benefits of democracy. However, there is a rebellion that takes place when leadership gets, how should we put it, annoyed with the new wants and desires of some of these fringe groups here, these religious groups. So the rebels will start to fight and try to throw off the Chinese government. They take major cities like the city of Nanjing in 1853. By 2 years later, there's 1 million more people ready to attack the main capital of Beijing. However, the Qing army does defeat them because they are more superiorly manned and technology ridden. By 1860, they are ready for an attack on Shanghai. However, the local groups of gentry are supporting the Qing and given rights to develop their own militia forces. So those militia forces are gathered in opposition to the rebels, and they are joined by the Europeans who come to help. One of the leaders of the initial rebellion, Hong, he will commit suicide in June of 1864. When he commits suicide, the rebellion falls apart. It is estimated that by the conclusion, there is a loss of anywhere from 20 to 30 million Chinese citizens. And of course, that many losses and that much damage to the homeland, especially on the frontier, will cause a sharp decline in agricultural production. The countryside experiences large waves of starvation as a result. And now we're going to look at F, which is reform movements. Responses to increasingly frequent rebellions led to reforms in policy. And so one of the examples that I have for you here is the Tanzimat reform movement, which is a series of reforms that were started by the Ottomans during 1839 to 1876. Those reforms are heavily influenced by European ideas. I have many of them listed for you. There is a thought that the old system is broken and you need to go to a system that's in the modern world. Some of your late sultans of the Ottoman Empire see that coming and they want to get in front of it and embrace that kind of effective merging of old and new. They will call for different institutions to be built that will guarantee security of life, property, and honor to all subjects regardless, and this is very important, of religion and race, once again being more open-ended. They are authorized eventually to develop their own standard systems of taxation. Once again, corruption is a very big issue, so they're trying to eliminate some of that, and they're trying to eliminate methods for military conscription and training, since the Janissary system was becoming vastly overrated and ineffective here towards the end of the Ottoman world. The development of a new secular school system, reorganization of the army, creation of provincial representative assemblies, and the introduction of new codes of commercial and criminal law are all modeled after European powers. In this case, France is the main assister in porting over several of these new systems. That new Ottoman world eventually leads us to other movements that are going to basically destroy it. The Young Turk movement is one of those. The Young Turks are a group of political reformists that are going to be taking place in the early 19th century. They want to totally replace the absolute monarchy of the Ottoman Empire and put in a constitutional monarchy where they can be elected and such. Later on, these leaders that are leading this Young Turk group are going to organize rebellion against the absolute rule of Sultan Abdul Hamid II. And with this revolution, there's a constitution that is drafted, and eventually you have 3 gentlemen that are going to rule after that constitution is written. And they are known collectively as the 3 Pashas. Pasha was an old title for a leader that was in the Ottoman world. The 3 Pashas take over total control, absolute control actually, from 1913 to 1918 until, of course, World War I's conclusion will totally get rid of the Ottoman world. And that happens because the 3 Pashas will bring the Ottoman Empire closer to Germany, and they will sign an alliance agreement. And therefore, when Germany gets into World War I, the Ottoman Empire gets into World War I. When Germany loses World War I, the Ottomans lose World War I. Following that, their other lasting legacy, besides leading to the breakup of the Ottoman world, is the carrying out of the Armenian genocide, which is a whole another topic of discussion you will get to when we talk about genocide movements in time period 6. A few more slides here. We're going to keep going east to the Chinese self-strengthening movement before we end up in Europe. As a result of several things like the Opium War and all the unequal treaties we talked about with imperialism and all that kind of stuff, and of course the uprisings that were already countered and defeated, your Qing courtiers and officials need to kind of re-strengthen and reorganize themselves. And they turn to Western science, Western language, schools, Western technology like military technology and factory technology, shipyard technology. All those are taken after Western models. However, it does not recognize other political theories or social theories in the West. And so that's the weakness there, is that they don't take all of it. They just take what they think is going to be helpful for China. So the weakness of all of that political institution reorganization is what's going to lead to this movement's failure. Modernization is difficult no matter where you try that. It's difficult for China during this movement because the bureaucracy that's going to be undertaking modernization is still deeply rooted in Neo-Confucian ideas, and those ideas are not welcoming of Western thought, obviously, because we've already covered this now for quite some time. The Chinese society themselves are still kind of trying to pick up the pieces after different rebellions, like the Taiping Rebellion we covered earlier, and so the foreigners that helped put down the Taiping Rebellion are still seen as really aggressive and negative towards the Chinese populace. Eventually, the foreign powers continue to push their might. They will take over lots of the peripheral states. Great examples of this are Russia, France, and Britain taking over outlying regions that had once given tribute to the Chinese emperor. Then eventually America also gets in by having the open door policy initiated. And this is a policy that's very important, whereby all foreign countries would have equal duties and privileges in all treaty ports within and outside the various spheres of influence. China no longer can say we only will have so many ports open to this country or that country, and they're going to be right here, here, and here. Basically, there's an open door, so every port has open trade with every foreign country, and that is going to be very problematic for the Chinese. And then finally here we got Bismarck and Germany. We conclude here with Europe right before we get to World War I. For much of the 1870s, Bismarck, pictured there in the bottom right, he is going to have a personal struggle with Catholicism and Catholics in his country, who make up 36% of the German population. He's going to build parochial schools that are under state control and try to kind of weed out, problematic Christian groups from that. In 1978, he kind of goes back on this earlier aggression and lets Catholics be allied with him against another big threat, in this case, socialism. In the 1880s, he will create the first modern welfare state, which, ironically enough, borrows a lot from socialistic tendencies. In 1883, for example, a national healthcare system is established. Insurance in 1884. You have pension plans by 1889. And of course, in 1885, he's going to step in and show the political power of Germany by putting forth and hosting the Berlin Conference. Thus, the scramble for Africa is kind of brought under one roof and is looked at and addressed. He himself, with Germany at heart, will take over certain territories as part of this hosting responsibility. He makes sure that Germany gets colonies in Africa. So you have a wide variety of response here with rebellion and revolt towards imperialism and all of the new powers to be, especially in Europe, and what they're doing to other locations geographically around the world.